1970s. So we are hoping to upgrade the charts, maps, and geology, and which really has a huge amount to say about the environmental issues relating to any body of water. So we're really quite excited about that. I would like to acknowledge Ted for his early support of this project. It's really the reason we were able to do it. He and the Tripp Foundation, I think, saw something in what we were doing that held great promise, and I hope my remarks today will illustrate that his confidence was well placed. I would also like to acknowledge the New York State Canal Corporation and the New York Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, all of whom have provided logistical support and financial support to allow us to get to this point. I use this bird's eye view of Watkins Glen intentionally. Unfortunately, it's kind of interesting. The zoom images on the right are actually covering one of the really important clues as to why Seneca Lake in general and Watkins Glen in particular has such a strong connection to this maritime history. And it's both the big southern waterfront. Watkins Glen was the southern working port on Seneca Lake for over a century. And it's also the connection to where the Chemung Canal came into Seneca Lake, which you can just barely see at the bottom of this slide.
Sorry to interrupt,
right.
You can actually double click on or just click on the top of the 4 pictures and drag that set of pictures aside, and then you can see it.
Okay, so if you see, look at that bottom right, you'll see an entryway where there's a bunch of, looks like boats. There are 5 or 6 canal boats shown, and really the canal history is really going to be the most prominent in what we've discovered to date, and so what I will be talking about. And essentially, the key to understanding why there is so much maritime history on the bottom of Seneca Lake, also Cayuga Lake and Keuka Lake and all the other Finger Lakes, is because of the interconnectedness of the natural waterways, which were utilized for transportation for thousands of years, certainly into the 20th century. And then the enhancement of those natural waterways by the building of canals, which made really these waterways the interstate highway system of an earlier time. And just like we've got thousands of trucks and working vehicles and passenger vehicles on our roads today, back in the day, so did these waterways. And we now know that where you have activity on the waterways, just like you have accidents on the highway, a certain number of these boats will have met their grief either through storm or warfare or just being scrapped because they were too old to repair. And so a big focus of our study is the boats. And so I use this really fabulous old image of the Durham boats that operated on the Mohawk River. This was a well-established class of boats. Prior to the American Revolution, there were dozens and dozens of these. They were relatively small. They really were, they were both a marvel of their age and really tedious to move. You can see they moved them with men and poles, sometimes walking in the shallows of the rivers. It's a big part of the story. But boats are the centerpiece of what we're hoping to study. And the way we do that is we look for the history. So where history happens, people leave their stuff behind. If the stuff is there long enough, it becomes archaeologically interesting. So I've already spent 40 years of my life studying the history and archaeology of Lake Champlain, which is a great window into what you would anticipate finding in other bodies of water. And here on Lake Champlain, the image you're seeing is the Battle of Valcour Island in 1776. It really happened. This is a painting that was done in 1776 to depict the American and British fleets coming into conflict for control of the strategic invasion route. And where this history happens, you would expect to find archaeological remains. And so, as you have probably seen in my bio, one of the most important things that I have to deal with for these last 20 years is the discovery of a gunboat from that 1776 American fleet intact on the bottom of Lake Champlain, which allows me to point out that finding the boats is the easiest part of the job. Managing the boats for their public value is complicated, and we're working it out as we go. But this is the type of thing we deal with on a day-to-day basis. In your part of the world, you had the Sullivan Campaign during the American Revolution, and there will be, particularly on land, lots of archaeological reflection of movements of troops and campsites. It's just the way that stuff works. After the war, Seneca Lake, like almost all large bodies of water in our region, began to see sloops, schooners, commercial vessels. As people started moving in, you needed to be able to move commercial goods, agricultural products, and people around the waterway, and boats were the key to that. And so this is a really terrific 1790s image of one of the first commercial boats on Seneca Lake. We also know that in the early 19th century, you get steamboats appearing on the Hudson River. That's the image you see in front of you. And steamboats appeared on Seneca Lake just a decade or so later. And so one of the other things we get to study besides the boats themselves is an evolution in transportation technology, its impact into the economics of the region, the sociology of the lives of the people who are involved in those activities. It's really, it's quite a rich human window into a very interesting world. Probably the greatest event that has happened to the waterways in our modern history happened 200 years ago with the opening of the New York State Canal System. That is the most remarkable piece of public works and engineering that may have ever been done in our region. It was instantaneously a success, and it created overnight, it was like the internet of their time period in terms of the impact and the explosion of, in this case, technology of boats. They started building boats to move people. That's the one you see in this image. It's a packet boat designed like a bus to take people through the system. It revolutionized travel to the West. And in your part of the world, Seneca Lake has a really, every place that these boats traveled has history with it. But Seneca Lake has a particularly rich history because Seneca Lake ultimately connected to 3 operating canals: the Cayuga Seneca and the Erie to the north, the Crooked Lake to get you to Crooked Lake or Cayuga Lake, and then, of course, the great Chemung Canal that went from Watkins Glen to Elmira and Corning and was a junction point for hundreds of tons of coal coming in from Pennsylvania. And where you have economic niches, you have the building of large fleets of boats to accommodate it. And so we know that this first generation of boats were all wooden boats. They were all designed to be towed by horses or mules walking on a towpath. And we also know that the size of these boats was dictated by the size of the canal, particularly the size of the locks of their generation. The original Clinton's Ditch, the 1825 canal, was tiny in relation to the present Barge Canal. And so the boats we find, one of the most interesting and easy ways to identify their time of origin is just to try to take a length measurement and a beam measurement, because that will instantly put it into one of those time periods for when the boat would have been built and what canal it was designed to operate on. And the truth is,
beautiful picture.
Very, very little about these first generation Erie Canal, Clinton's Ditch boats. And so when I started studying this, I went to see what had been learned, what had been written, what had been written down. And there's really very little that's been chronicled to date. And there's very little in the way of images, because by the time the Chemung Canal and the Crooked Lake Canal closed, you were just barely getting into the age of photography. So the best image that I've been able to find of a Chemung Seneca Lake traveling canal boat is in this 1860s painting, which hangs at the Montour Falls Library. And if you look at the detail of those canals in the canal itself, it's really fabulous and remarkable. And whoever painted this painted it to try to capture those details. But we've never actually seen one until this survey. We've seen other evidence of these canals. This is a 1850s. Those would be the Chemung, Crooked Lake canal boats being towed into Geneva by a small steam tug. So we'll also be expecting to find big steamboats, little steamboats, rowboats, pleasure boats, boats that you would see in the Finger Lakes Boating Museum should all be represented on the bottom of Seneca Lake at some point. And our goal will be to completely inventory the entire bottom of Seneca Lake. If there's a villain in our story, our maritime story, it's the railroads. And of course, they eventually displaced a lot of the trade and commerce on the canal. And so by the 1880s, the Crooked Lake Canal and the Chemung Canal were closed. They never expanded. So any boat that traveled on those canals had to be of the first generation size. But for a short time, the railroads actually added some steam to the environment. And so to get a real sense of the commercial dynamics, I mean, today you look out on Seneca Lake and you see vineyards and an aesthetic scene that is remarkable and to be loved. But at one point, for about 100 years, it was a working environment with commercial harbors, commercial captains, pilots, seamen, and in this case, dozens and dozens of canal boats being towed through the lake to move products north and south onto the other canals. By the early 20th century, the canal expanded into the canal we have now, the Barge Canal, which itself is over 100 years, and it created a much bigger system designed to take much bigger boats and handle more tonnage in an effort to stay viable. And here's a really neat Watkins Glen Seneca Lake image. This is something that Ted found for me. It's the Watkins Glen Salt Company, somewhere around probably 1940. And these boats, these wooden boats held over from the earlier canal, all of these 5 wooden boats and their steam tug could lock through the present Barge Canal locks in one locking. And that's why this particular group is heading to New York City with table salt from Seneca Lake. But the commerce on Seneca Lake was definitely changing. It's the 20th century. The railroads, the highways and trucks and rail were really displacing the commercial traffic, but it was being replaced to some extent by human traffic, because now there was also a viable commercial outlet by bringing people out to the lake, not to move heavy products, but to enjoy the beauty, the sunsets, the stories, and the history of the region. And I would argue that's a period that we're still in and still taking advantage of through some of the wonderful excursion boats, particularly the ones that operate out of Watkins Glen. So in 2018, the Corning Museum of Glass decided to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the glass company moving from Brooklyn to Corning, all on the waterways. There was back then you could take a boat, a canal boat, load it in Brooklyn and take it through this interconnected waterway system of rivers, lakes, and canals, and you could unload your cargo in the Chemung River at Corning, and that's just what they did. And so for this 150th anniversary, I was asked to participate. You can see us, this is us on the first stop in Brooklyn in May of 2018. The Lois McClure is to the left. The wonderful Corning glass barge is to the right. And this was probably the best experience of my life. I was also asked to write up some of the history of how the waterways were used to facilitate this movement. And in doing so, I realized that Seneca Lake was a key link in that commercial chain. And I also accidentally stumbled on an account of a canal boat sinking in 1868. And that canal boat was called the Frank Bawley. It went down with a load of coal that it loaded at Coal Point in Watkins Glen in a storm. And it was such a specific account, I was quite confident that we could find it with our technology. And so I recruited the guys you see in this slide, Tim Kaza to the left and Dennis Gerber to the right. These are really solid, super guys. They had been serving in Oneida Lake. They had been serving and are serving in Lake Ontario. And they joined the team and began helping us look for the Frank Bawley, which we found in the first 3 hours of our survey. This is what a sonar image looks under as it examines underwater. You can see something to the left of the screen on the bottom that looks like it might be a shipwreck. Well, that's exactly what that shipwreck looked like. We had allocated 3 days for the survey, so we kept on surveying. And in a short amount of time, we found 8 additional boats. It's unbelievable how dense the collection of shipwrecks on the bottom of Seneca Lake is. And it's also not remarkable, but it's really fantastic, the state of preservation. So you see in this image, what we're calling target number 5. It's the 5th target we found in the survey. You can see in the photographs, the boat is completely intact in the same condition it was in when it went to the bottom, minus the fact that you now have quagga mussels encrusting all of these shipwrecks. And that's an environmental issue that we are trying to understand and is probably subject for another day. But the boat itself, as you can see from the drawing, all taken from this videotape, is completely intact, still has its cargo. It's a first generation, early Lake Champlain canal boat. And it's in its own self remarkable because this may be the discovery of this boat may have allowed us to say that we've discovered a whole new class of sailing canal boats like the Lois McClure that would have existed on Seneca Lake during those commercial days. So this is our research kind of starts here. The survey in 2018 was so successful, we geared up to expand it in 2019 by bringing the Middlebury College extraordinary survey boat, David Folger, picture here, out through the canal, which is one of the great things the canal allows us to do. We brought it into Seneca Lake to begin to not only expand our underwater survey for shipwrecks, but also to start with the extraordinary equipment on this vessel to map the bathymetry of the bottom of Seneca Lake. Here you see Dr. Tom Manley, our primary scientist, looking at the screens, and the images you see are all multi-beam sonar data collecting millions of bits of information literally every second as we move through the lake to create the most accurate three-dimensional images of the geography of the lake bottom that have ever been seen. We also found a whole bunch of other canal boats. And again, as this one, Target 16, will indicate, we are dealing with completely intact. This is another first generation, circa 1825 canal boat, absolutely in as-built condition, which is, from an archaeological point of view, such an extraordinary opportunity for us. But the boat that has given us the most excitement is actually a target we found in 2018, hence its target number as number 7. But we didn't get a chance to look at it till 2019 because of the depth of water it's in. And this boat not only represents a first generation Erie Canal boat, but we now believe we may be looking at the only known archaeological example of a Erie Canal packet boat that would have existed from about 1820 to 1850. By 1850, the railroads had already replaced their function, and we've never seen one in the wild. And so in Buffalo, they're about to build one as part of the bicentennial commemoration. And we are extremely excited about being able to offer new information to help them in that quest. So this is a sunrise over your harbor that I took the day we left with the Lois McClure to head back home. And I can't thank you enough for allowing me to prototype this presentation. I can't even tell if you've heard all of this. So I'm hoping that from your questions, I will get a sense that this may be a new avenue for me to share these stories with folks in the time ahead. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you, Ted.
Beautiful, Arthur. Thank you very much. Why don't you turn your screen off? There you go.
Okay.
Art is willing to stick around and answer some questions if people have any.
I have a question. Do you think that the mussels attached to the wrecks are going to harm them at all?
Yes.
Yes.
So let's go back to I showed you that the Revolutionary War gunboat early in my presentation. One of the things that I felt we needed to do, because that boat has not a single mussel on it right now, but we have been told by the biologists we work with that we can predict with certainty that this boat will eventually get encrusted by quagga mussels. And I felt like we needed to be able to define whether that was a good thing, a bad thing, or a neutral thing. And so we spent 4 years in partnership with the University of Vermont doing a zebra mussel study to try to determine what zebra mussels colonizing on a shipwreck due to the fabric, the wood and the iron that holds it all together. And unfortunately, we have concluded that the colony of mussels will cause the iron fastenings that hold these boats together to degrade 25 times faster than an environment without them. And so we think the same thing is going to happen with quagga mussels. One of the studies we hope to grow into in our Seneca Lake work is to actually do a parallel study in Seneca Lake specifically focused on quagga mussels and to determine and confirm that the same phenomenon will be happening. Did that get to you?
Thank you. Yes, that's perfect.
This Mark Rondinaro, I've got a question, Art. So the data from the bathymetric survey that's being performed, is that going to be released into the public domain for other researchers from other fields to have access?
It's going to be wiped of the shipwreck targets so that we keep that information essentially for their own protection, confidential. And right now, so here's the, the catch-22 is we were able to, the 2 years that we've been out have been really experimental. We've done it on what I'd call a wing and a prayer budget because we wanted to do it and we wanted to demonstrate what the potential values and results could be. What we don't have, we have no post-processing support. By the same token, we have started talking with the New York DEC and Sea Grant and all those folks, and the folks at Hobart William Smith who are joining us and very enthusiastic about working with us. And so the goal will be to systematically gather this data from all of Seneca Lake, have the do the post-processing to create the maps and charts, but also have that data set available to any researcher who needs it.
Excellent, thank you.
I want to take a moment as your official greeter and recognize that we have not just Art as a guest, but we also have Bryan Stratton, who's joined us from the Erie Canal Corporation. Thanks, Brian.
Hi, Judy. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here.
Brian, I had no way of knowing if he actually made it. So Brian has been probably, he's been supporting us and empowering us for more than a decade. We've worked in partnership with the Canal Corporation to bring the Lois McClure throughout the system to interpret canal history. And I'm very, very grateful to the Canal Corp and to Brian for their support and empowerment.
Well, thank you, Art. It's our pleasure to be able to support it, and I know that I share your disappointment and all of ours that we're not able to get back out on the lake this year, and we're not sure that we have a canal that will connect Lake Champlain to Watkins Glen and to Sampson State Park, but we're very excited about all that you found out and equally excited about the ongoing work at the Buffalo Maritime Center, which is recreating, again, with the Canal Corporation support, but huge support from the governor's office, the Seneca chief. And talk about timing. I mean, finding our first artifact of a canal packet boat ever while we're recreating probably the world's most famous and most storied packet boat. So that's an exciting time. It's great news. And thank you for letting me dive bomb into your Rotary meeting, Watkins Glen.
Well, as everybody keeps saying, we're all in this together. So it's very exciting on one level. And it is true that we had planned, we had already had this all set to bring the David Folger back to Seneca Lake in 2020 to continue the survey, and that will not be possible this year. But we are still looking at the possibility of doing some additional ROV work on some of the more important targets. That will all have to wait to be seen, but it certainly will allow us to plan and build constituencies and come back in 2021 with a really robust program that will include, I mean, a big part of what we want to grow into is not just the biological quagga mussel studies, but we've already been speaking to the K through 12 school curriculum folks all around Seneca Lake in terms of making the connection to this history, archaeology, and science to the local school systems, which is a big part of our job, and developing exhibits, because this history adds a texture and a character for both the residents of the valley and the people who come visit. I mean, I've been aware, because I've spent a lot of time in the region with the Lois McClure, Geneva, Watkins, Glen. There's very few visual representations of this commercial past. And where I see that, I see opportunity. And so that's really what we're hoping to grow into over the years ahead.
Very good.
If I'd like to interrupt for a minute, let our members of the club know, Bryan, number one, thank you for being here. I'm still wearing the canal pin that you gave me when the Lois McClure was here and we met. But Judy Cherry is also I don't know the official title, on the advisory board of the Canal Corporation.
She's on every board, everywhere.
And it's a wonderful combination that we have her. And Bryan, I certainly urge you from a local standpoint, if the Canal Corporation can help Arthur continue this, finish the lake, get DEC involved, and everybody else, it's going to be well worthwhile.
Well, we have tremendous enthusiasm, if not funds, for his project. We were able to give a small contribution last year. Our intention was to do the same this year. We have one minor problem, in that we have to get the canal back open too, because the connection between Lake Champlain and Watkins Glen probably goes through 3 or 4, maybe even more locks that were under pump out and stopped mid-March, and they have about 2 months more worth of work left to be done when we go back online. And without that lock connection, of course, Art and the crew from Middlebury College will not be able to get to Watkins Glen and to get to Seneca Lake unless we airlift them out of Burlington and drop them in the middle of the lake. So I'm trying to work on that option, Art.
Maybe the governor would lend his helicopter to lift them.
Wouldn't that be something? No, we're very supportive, and not only through the Canal Corporation, but also trying to engage my colleagues on the governor's cabinet through the Parks Department, the Office of State Parks and Historic Preservation, and also the DEC office, DEC Commissioner Sagos. So I've been trying to recruit them, and I think they're equally supportive. I mean, this is certainly a state great story, but a national story also. So it's highly relevant to what we do and very important. And we're just anxious to be able to get it on the front burner, and as our nation and our world gets back online.
Thank you.
I'd like to just make one point while I'm thinking about it, guys, which is I've been working since last summer on a final report, a written report that will really present the results of the study and the historic perspective and the bathymetry. I'm quite excited about it. I had a little extra time to work on it this year because of the pandemic. And so I would expect that by mid-June, that will be in hand, and through Ted, I'll make sure that anybody that would like to get one will know how to do that.
Great.
Well, thank you, Arthur, very much. We appreciate sincerely, and I'm glad you've learned how to use Zoom.
Well, I only presume it did because everybody asked questions, but this is a brave new world for me. I mean, this is so, you know, we all made history here together, guys.
God bless.